Welcome to Reformed Thinking. You know, um, Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of absolute precision.
Right, yeah.
Like it feels like engineering. You break your arm, you go to the hospital, the doctor puts you in front of an x-ray machine, and it prints out that stark black and white film.
Yes.
And the doctor just points to that jagged white line on the screen and
Yeah.
says, there it is. That is the problem.
It is completely binary. I mean, it is objective.
Broken or not broken. It is clean. And, it makes sense to our modern minds.
Yeah. And it is highly comforting. We like things to be visible. We like to be able to categorize our problems, isolate the variables, and just apply a straightforward mechanical fix.
But then you step into the world of human malice, personal suffering, and divine providence, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely useless.
Oh, absolutely.
You cannot just point to a clear line and say, here is where human sin ends and here is where God's sovereign will begins.
You just cannot do it.
So we are looking at a theological landscape today that is often misunderstood, but absolutely vital for your sanity. Our mission for today's deep dive is to understand the staggering reality of how God's meticulous providence interacts with sheer human malice.
And we are pulling from two rigorously detailed theological commentaries today. They both examine Genesis chapter 45, verses 4 through 15.
Right, which is the specific moment Joseph reveals himself to his brothers in Egypt. And I want to speak directly to you, the listener, right from the start. This is not an archaic history lesson about ancient Middle Eastern agricultural policy.
Not at all.
We are examining a radically different lens for viewing your own life. This ancient text dictates the way you view your personal suffering, the way you extend forgiveness to those who have wronged you, and the way you interpret history itself. Okay, let's unpack this. Let us set the scene.
Yeah, let us look at the room.
We are in the Egyptian palace. It is the dramatic climax of the entire narrative spanning multiple chapters. And the tension in this room is completely suffocating.
It really is a terrifying moment. Picture the brothers standing there. They are in the presence of the vizier, the second in command of the greatest empire on the planet.
Right.
Egypt at this time is unparalleled in its wealth and military might. And these brothers, they are desperate, starving peasants from Canaan.
Yeah, they're entirely at his mercy.
And they are completely unaware that this supreme ruler, dressed in fine linen, wearing the gold chain of Pharaoh, speaking through an Egyptian interpreter, is the very brother they violently betrayed.
The one they stripped and threw into a pit over 2 decades prior.
Right. The historical context here is heavy. Guilt does not have an expiration date. They traded his life for 20 pieces of silver.
And they ignored his cries for mercy while they sat down and literally ate a meal next to that pit.
Yes. And then they went home and lied straight to the face of their grieving father, Jacob, for over 20 years.
And now, the curtain is pulled back. They find out he's alive.
Oh.
And he holds their literal lives in his hands.
It is a terrifying realization for them.
Modern secular psychology would argue that severe trauma permanently defines a person. So the expectation, culturally speaking, is that Joseph has every right to be consumed by bitterness.
Oh, absolutely. He should be anticipating swift, brutal retaliation. The brothers themselves are expecting retributive justice for their malice. They know what they did.
Imagine standing before a supreme judge whom you had once tried to assassinate. You were expecting the heavy gavel to fall. But instead, the judge steps down from the bench and embraces you.
Right.
Because Joseph's first full sentence to them, the moment the room is clear to the Egyptian guards, is an invitation. He says, "Come near to me."
He invites them into nearness.
He does. But it is vital to point out that time alone does not atone for sin. The brothers are not innocent just because 22 years have passed.
What's fascinating here is how Joseph handles that reality. He does not offer shallow optimism. He does not minimize their wickedness just to make the room feel less awkward.
No, he doesn't sweep it away.
Not at all. He names the sin clearly. He says, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt." He does not whitewash their guilt.
That is such a crucial point.
It is. Before the healing balm of grace can be applied, the deadly reality of sin must be fully exposed. But we also have to look at the literary attention leading up to this specific moment. Because Joseph did not just immediately forgive them the first time they walked into Egypt to buy grain.
Right. He put them through an absolute psychological ringer.
He really did. He put them through a rigorous series of psychological and spiritual tests.
And like when they first arrived.
Yes, when they first arrived, he accused them of being foreign spies. He threw them in prison for 3 days.
Wow.
He then bound Simeon before their eyes and kept him as a hostage, demanding they return to Canaan and bring their youngest brother Benjamin back to Egypt.
And when they finally did bring Benjamin, Joseph planted his own personal silver cup in Benjamin's sack of grain to frame the boy for theft.
He recreated the very same scenario from 20 years ago. The brothers had another chance to abandon a favored son of Jacob and save their own skins.
Right, because Benjamin was the only other son of Rachel, Joseph's mother. He was the new favorite. Joseph was testing them to see if they were still the same murderous, jealous men who sold him.
Precisely. And what happens? Judah, the very brother who originally proposed selling Joseph into slavery for profit in Genesis 37, steps forward.
He steps up.
In Genesis 44, Judah delivers one of the most agonizing, beautiful speeches in all of ancient literature. Judah offers himself as a penal substitute for Benjamin.
That is just incredible.
He begs the Egyptian ruler to let the boy go home to his father and offers to become a slave in Egypt for the rest of his life to bear the punishment so his brother can go free.
So these tests were absolutely necessary to prove a genuine, spirit-wrought change in their hearts.
Yes. Once Joseph sees that sacrificial substitutionary love from Judah, he can no longer restrain himself. The suspense breaks with loud tears. The text says he wept so loudly that the Egyptians outside the room heard him.
So we see the incredible personal family dynamic resolving in this opulent throne room. But let's zoom out for a second.
Okay.
The scene in that room is incredibly intimate. But outside those palace doors, the entire known world is starving to death.
Yes, they are.
This brings us to the massive geopolitical sandbox of the ancient Near East. This is not a localized dry spell in Canaan. It is a catastrophic, multi-year global famine.
The scope of this famine cannot be overstated. In the ancient world, a 7-year famine was an apocalyptic event.
Right.
We are talking about the total collapse of societal infrastructure, mass migration, and widespread death. And Egypt was the undisputed breadbasket of the ancient world.
Because of the Nile.
Yes, the reason for this lies in their geography. Egypt relied on the Nile River, which provided predictable annual inundation. The river would flood its banks every year, depositing nutrient-dense silt, creating a robust, highly predictable agricultural infrastructure.
Right. While surrounding nations like Canaan relied entirely on seasonal rainfall.
And they were therefore entirely devastated when the rain stopped. But Egypt had the capacity, and under Joseph's leadership, the administrative foresight, to store massive amounts of grain during the 7 years of plenty.
So, the brothers traveling to Egypt was a matter of basic survival. Their crops had failed, their livestock were likely dying. They have money, but you cannot eat silver.
You really cannot.
But our source texts bring up a massive covenantal necessity here. I have to ask, why did God orchestrate this massive migration of Jacob's family out of Canaan? They were promised the land of Canaan. Why move them to Egypt?
The commentaries point out that if Jacob's family had stayed in Canaan during this famine, they faced 2 distinct dangers that threatened the entire redemptive plan of God.
Okay, what is the first one?
The first, obviously, is physical starvation. The Messianic line, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, could have literally died out in the famine.
That makes sense. And the second?
The second danger is much more insidious. It is spiritual assimilation. They were already living among the pagan Canaanites and beginning to adopt their ways.
Oh, right.
We see this clearly in Genesis chapter 38, right after Joseph is sold. The text pauses to tell us about Judah's disastrous moral failures, intermarrying with Canaanites and adopting their corrupt practices.
That is a huge problem.
It is. This practice directly threatened to pollute the promised messianic line. They needed to be separated. They needed a protective barrier.
Wait, I struggle with this.
Yeah.
Was moving them to Egypt just a pragmatic survival tactic to get grain? Or is there a bigger theological design at play? Because it seems like they're just reacting to the weather.
It is entirely theological. The weather is simply the instrument. By relocating the 70 members of Jacob's household to the specific region of Goshen in Egypt, God sovereignly placed them in a cultural incubator.
A cultural incubator. I like that.
The source material notes a specific, fascinating cultural dynamic. The Egyptians openly despised shepherds.
Really?
Yes. To an Egyptian, tending sheep was an abomination. Because the Israelites were shepherds by trade, they were naturally and heavily socially segregated in the land of Goshen.
So they were kept apart.
This providential segregation guaranteed they could multiply into a vast nation over the next 400 years without mixing their bloodlines or their religion with their pagan neighbors. The Egyptians would not intermarry with them because they found them culturally repulsive.
Wow, so God was meticulously managing the macroeconomy of the world's greatest empire just to preserve a tiny, vulnerable family of 70 people.
Yes, he was.
This demonstrates emphatically that all secular human history operates strictly under God's redemptive history. God dictates the weather patterns, the atmospheric pressure causing the rains to fail, the agricultural harvests, and the rise and fall of absolute monarchs, all to fulfill his specific promises to Abraham.
It is breathtaking when you look at the scale of it.
That is staggering. The macro-level control of international weather systems and the micro-level preservation of one family are governed by the exact same sovereign.
Absolutely.
So we see God using this famine as a geopolitical cattle prod to move his people into the incubator of Egypt. But let's zoom back into that throne room.
Let's do it.
Joseph knows this macro-level theology, but how does he actually explain it to his brothers who are currently sweating bullets and expecting to be executed?
That is the big question.
Let's look at the specific Hebrew words he chooses. This brings us to the grammar of sovereignty. Joseph says, "whom you sold into Egypt," but immediately follows that with, "for God sent me before you to preserve life."
The Hebrew text provides a breathtaking juxtaposition here. The verb used when Joseph says, "you sold," is makar.
Makar.
Yes.
Mhm.
It is an active verb. It places the responsibility, the malice, and the guilt squarely on the shoulders of the brothers. The text does not alleviate their guilt. They acted entirely out of their own volition, driven by jealousy, hatred, and greed. But then, in the very same breath, Joseph uses the verb shalach, meaning to send, when speaking of God's action. God sent me.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like an author writing a novel.
Oh, that is a good way to put it.
The characters within the story make real, accountable choices, driven by their own motives, their own jealousies, and their own desires.
Yeah.
When the villain in a book does something evil, the villain is acting according to his own character. But the author of the novel is entirely sovereign over how the whole script unfolds to reach the final chapter.
Right.
The characters are truly making choices, but the author is writing the overarching story.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we are looking at the theological concept of compatibilism.
Compatibilism.
This is a crucial doctrine. Human beings act freely and culpably, meaning they are fully responsible for their malice, yet God mysteriously and perfectly ordains those very acts for a redemptive end.
It is a lot to wrap your mind around.
Look at the negative-positive contrast Joseph uses in verse 8. He says, "So it was not you who sent me here, but God."
Right.
Syntactically, he places God as the active, ultimate subject, forcefully negating the brothers as the primary cause. God is the primary, highest cause of Joseph being in Egypt. The brothers are the secondary, instrumental cause.
Okay.
Their evil actions were the specific mechanism God utilized, without God himself ever being the author of sin.
Okay, but let me push back on this, because I know a lot of listeners will hear this and raise a red flag.
Sure, it is a difficult concept.
If God is the one who ultimately sent Joseph, and the brothers are just these secondary instrumental causes, how is it just for God to hold them accountable?
Right.
My secular friends would hear this and say God entrapped them. They would say, if God wrote the script, the brothers are just puppets. You can't punish a puppet.
Yeah.
How do our source texts defend God's justice here against that kind of skepticism?
That is the most common objection to compatibilism. The sources handle this by distinguishing between the motive of the actors and the design of God.
The motive versus the design.
Yes. The brothers were not trying to fulfill God's prophecy when they threw Joseph in the pit. They were trying to murder him. Their intention was pure evil.
Yeah, they hated him.
God's intention in that exact same event was pure salvation. It was to position Joseph to save the known world from starvation.
So the intentions are completely different.
Exactly. God did not put the evil in their hearts. Their hearts were already thoroughly corrupt. God simply withdrew his restraining grace and directed their pre-existing malice to accomplish a holy outcome.
Wow.
They are punished for their wicked intentions. God is praised for his saving intentions.
That is a massive distinction. And the commentaries we are analyzing forcefully contrast this biblical reality against several alternative views that try to solve this tension by diminishing God's absolute control.
Yes, they do.
For instance, they reject Arminianism.
Yes, Arminian theology suggests that God merely looks down the corridor of time, sees what humans will freely choose to do, and then reacts to make the best of a bad situation.
It paints God as a cosmic chess player reacting to our moves.
But this text shatters that. God did not just react to the brothers selling Joseph. God actively sent Joseph. The sending was the primary action.
The sources also reject open theism.
Yes.
This is the idea that God does not actually know the future free choices of humans, and therefore he takes risks. But let's break down the mechanics of why that fails here.
Okay.
Open theism argues God doesn't know the future free choices of men. But look at Joseph's timeline. God had to know the famine was coming decades later.
Right.
And he had to know the brothers' free, malicious choice to sell Joseph would be the exact vehicle to get him to Egypt in time to rise through the political ranks and prepare the grain silos.
It is all perfectly timed.
The text mathematically breaks open theism. If God didn't know their free choices, the entire preservation of the messianic line was left up to blind chance.
Absolutely. And the commentaries take a very firm stance against the prosperity gospel as well.
They do.
The source texts vigorously reject the ideology which falsely claims that God's favor guarantees a life free of hardships, sickness, and poverty.
Just look at Joseph.
Right. Joseph was highly favored by God. He was given prophetic dreams. Yet that specific divine favor led him directly into human trafficking, slavery in a foreign land, false accusations of sexual assault by Potiphar's wife, and years rotting in a subterranean dungeon.
That is a rough resume.
It really is. God's meticulous providence does not guarantee your earthly comfort. It guarantees his holy purposes will be accomplished in you.
Right.
God ordains whatsoever comes to pass, but the liberty of second causes, like human choices, is established, not taken away.
You know, this towering theology isn't just an academic exercise to debate in a seminary classroom. It actually dictates how you treat people who have wronged you on a Tuesday afternoon.
Very true.
It moves us from high doctrine to the anatomy of true reconciliation. Because in verses 9 through 15, Joseph doesn't just offer theological comfort to his terrified brothers. He provides concrete logistical care.
He issues a rapid flurry of urgent commands. He tells them to hurry, to go up to their father Jacob in Canaan, and to bring him down to Egypt.
He doesn't waste any time.
He promises them the fertile land of Goshen. He explicitly promises to provide for them during the remaining 5 years of the famine so they do not become impoverished.
Wow.
He says, I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come. Grace, in the biblical sense, takes a highly logistical, practical form.
It is not ethereal.
Not at all. It involves wagons, grain, land, and physical protection.
It is not just an abstract feeling of goodwill. I know in my own life, my default setting when someone wrongs me is just sweep the broken glass under the rug and pretend the betrayal never happened.
Yeah, that is very common.
It feels easier to just keep the peace. Contrast that biblical forgiveness with modern secular therapy language. Today, people often want forgiveness without confession or reconciliation without truth.
We want to skip the awkward part.
We really do. But the text demands truthful nearness. Grace does not mean amnesia. Joseph exposes the sin fully before applying the healing balm of grace. He says, who you sold.
He points right at it.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Think of it this way. Forgiveness isn't sweeping the broken glass under the rug where someone will inevitably step on it later and bleed out.
No.
Forgiveness is sweeping the broken glass into the dustpan in the broad daylight. You acknowledge the damage, you look at the sharp edges together, you agree that it is broken, and then you deal with it properly and throw it away.
That truthful acknowledgement is what breaks the curse of hidden sin. One of the sources points out that hidden sin works like a fever in the bones.
A fever in the bones.
Think about the psychological toll on these brothers. They had been silenced by their guilt for over 2 decades.
20 years of keeping that secret.
Every time they looked at their father Jacob, they knew they had caused his inconsolable grief. Their mouths were shut by shame. But notice the specific detail at the end of this passage in verse 15. It says, and he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. After that, his brothers talked with him.
It finally talked.
The text makes a point to tell us they finally talked. Grace produces truthful conversation. Sin produces silence, deception, and distance.
That is so good.
The alienation created by their malice has been overcome by grace, resulting in restored communion.
And Joseph's robust theology, knowing that God was the supreme author of his circumstances, completely freed him from the poisonous bondage of revenge.
It freed him entirely.
He saw the sovereign hand of God in his suffering, which meant he didn't have to destroy his brothers to find justice. He entrusted the pen to God.
Yeah.
If Joseph believed his brothers were the sole authors of his destiny, he would have executed them on the spot. But because he believed God was the highest author, he could afford to be merciful.
And while Joseph is a stunning, breathtaking example of grace, the text relentlessly points forward to an even greater reality.
Okay, where is it pointing?
The commentaries point out that this isn't just neat literary coincidence. As we examine redemptive history, we must recognize the highest fulfillment.
Right?
Joseph stands as one of the clearest types of Jesus Christ in the entire Old Testament. Typology is God's way of teaching his people the shape of salvation before the Savior actually arrives on the stage of history.
It is a pattern.
Yes.
Yeah.
He is conditioning the Israelites to recognize that salvation comes through a suffering, betrayed servant who is exalted to the right hand of the king.
Let's trace those typological parallels, because
Okay.
they are staggering. Once you see them, you cannot unsee them.
Go ahead.
Both Joseph and Jesus were the specially beloved sons of their father. Both were sent by their father from the place of comfort to seek the welfare of their brothers.
Yes.
Both were hated without cause by their own brethren. Both were violently stripped of their garments by those who mank them.
The parallels go even further into the darker and more glorious aspects of the narrative. Joseph was sold by his brother Judah for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus Christ was betrayed by Judas, which is literally the Greek translation for the Hebrew name Judah, for 30 pieces of silver.
That is wild.
Joseph was cast into a waterless, dark pit in the wilderness, which is a clear biblical symbol for the grave. Christ was crucified, died, and was laid in a stone tomb.
And the exaltation is just as perfectly mirrored. Joseph was raised from the dungeon and exalted to the right hand of Pharaoh.
Right.
Pharaoh gave him his signet ring, clothed him in fine linen, and gave him absolute authority to save a starving world with physical bread.
Every knee had to bow to Joseph.
And Christ was raised from the dead and exalted to the right hand of God the Father. He was given all authority in heaven and on earth to save humanity, offering not just physical sustenance, but offering himself as the true bread of life.
This raises an important question regarding how we view the cross itself. The cross of Christ was not an emergency backup plan formulated after humanity ruined God's original design.
It was not a plan B.
It was not a reaction to humanity spinning out of control. Just as God meticulously ordained the pit of Joseph to bring about the salvation of the known world, God meticulously ordained the cross of Christ to bring about the salvation of his people.
Yeah.
The source material quotes Acts chapter 4, verses 27 and 28, which declares that Herod, Pontius Pilate, the Gentiles, and the peoples of Israel gathered together to do whatever God's hand and plan had predestined to take place.
They all played a part.
Lawless men acted wickedly, entirely out of their own corrupt free will, crucifying the Lord of glory. Yet through those very malicious actions, they accomplished the definite saving plan and foreknowledge of God.
That completely crushes moralism.
Yes, it does.
A moralistic reading of this Genesis text just says, be a nice person, forgive your siblings when they steal your toys, try to be a good guy like Joseph.
Right, which is just self-help.
But that is utterly insufficient and completely misses the weight of the text. The lesson isn't that you are Joseph in the story. You are not the innocent, pure sufferer dispensing grace.
No, you are not.
The lesson is that you are the guilty brothers. Let that sink in. You are standing before the blinding judgment seat of the exalted Lord of the universe. You are entirely undone. You have zero defense. You are completely deserving of death for your rebellion against him. And the exalted Lord of glory, Jesus Christ, looks down at you and says, come to me.
He brings you near.
He brings you near by his blood. He doesn't just pardon you, he invites you to the table.
The brothers could not heal themselves by self-improvement. They could not work off their debt. They were summoned by the one who held all authority and who extended unmerited grace.
Right.
The source material also points out that this narrative provides a theological framework that rejects modern ideologies focused on endless grievance.
How so?
The authors argue that texts like this categorically reject frameworks that demand perpetual cycles of reparation and endless apologies without resolution.
Okay, I see.
True reconciliation is found solely in the sovereign grace of God that forgives the most heinous of sins. It requires an honest confrontation with human depravity, followed by a radical, unnatural forgiveness that mirrors Christ forgiving his executioners.
Which brings us to the massive stakes of this deep dive for you, the listener. You must rigorously apply the doctrine of God's meticulous sovereignty directly to your own personal suffering.
It is highly practical.
We all face unjust actions, betrayals, and deep wounds. Someone may have slandered you, stolen from you, or abandoned you. When you are mistreated, do not give way to the soul-destroying sin of bitterness.
Bitterness will ruin you.
Do not assume your pain is meaningless or that God is simply watching helplessly from afar, wishing he could intervene, but unable to stop human free will. Look at the purposeful hand of God. The sovereign Lord uses the heavy anvil of affliction to forge you.
He really does.
The narrative of Joseph proves mathematically that God can take real wickedness, preserve human responsibility so that the perpetrators are truly accountable, and yet bend the entire matter toward saving mercy for his people.
Before we conclude, consider a thought regarding the original audience who first heard Moses teach this text.
Oh, that is a great point.
Think about the Israelites. The original Israelites were wandering in a harsh, terrifying wilderness after the Exodus. Whenever they faced a lack of water or a lack of food, they immediately accused God of abandonment.
Right, they complained constantly.
They assumed human difficulty equated to divine malice. They would cry out, "Did you bring us out here to kill us?"
Yeah.
They totally failed to realize that God was currently leading them, protecting them, and testing them, just as he had flawlessly led their ancestors into the incubator of Egypt to preserve them during the famine.
They missed the whole point.
They interpreted their circumstances through the lens of fear instead of through the lens of God's character.
Think about your own life right now. Are you looking at a current hardship, a literal dungeon or desert phase in your life right now?
It is a hard place to be.
Are you faithlessly concluding you have been abandoned because the situation looks bleak? Are you looking at the jagged white line on the x-ray of your life and assuming the story is over?
Yeah.
What if the specific circumstances causing you the most anxiety today, the very things keeping you awake at night, are the precise, meticulously designed instruments God is using to position you for your own preservation?
That changes everything.
What if the author is writing a better final chapter than you could ever comprehend? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the text. We will see you next time.